The morning mist hangs thick over the River Forth. It's September 11th, 1297, and on the south bank, an English army is assembling. Thousands of soldiers, heavy cavalry in full armor, Welsh archers with their deadly longbows, professional infantrymen carrying the banners of King Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots. This is the military force of the most powerful kingdom in Europe. These men have conquered Wales, they've crushed rebellions, they've burned Scottish towns to the ground and hanged their leaders from castle walls. At the head of this force rides John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey. A veteran commander, a man who has served English kings for decades. He looks across the river and sees what he expects to see: a rabble. Scottish rebels with poor equipment and no real training, peasants playing at war. But on the north bank of that river, hidden partially by morning fog and the curve of the land, someone else is watching. Someone who has been planning this moment for months, someone who understands that the bridge between these two armies is not just a crossing point. It's a killing ground. His name is William Wallace. And in the next few minutes, he will teach England a lesson they will never forget. It doesn't matter how strong your army is if you put it in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you want to hear more stories like this, battles where strategy defeated strength, where the impossible became real, where one decision changed the course of nations, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of history. Let's go back in time. Let's understand how we arrived at this moment. Scotland in 1297 is not an independent nation, not really. Just a few years earlier, Scotland had a king, a parliament, its own laws and identity. But then the king died without a clear heir. Multiple Scottish nobles claimed the throne, and civil war was threatened. The Scottish nobles made a fatal mistake. They asked King Edward I of England to mediate the dispute, to help them choose a new king fairly. Edward agreed, but Edward didn't come to mediate. He came to conquer. Edward I is not called the Hammer of the Scots as a compliment. He is methodical, brutal, and absolutely convinced of English superiority. When he looks at Scotland, he doesn't see a neighboring kingdom. He sees a rebellious province that needs to be brought to heel. So Edward picks a Scottish king, John Balliol, but only on one condition: Balliol must swear total loyalty to England. English administrators move into Scottish castles. English laws replace Scottish customs, English garrisons occupy major towns. Tax money flows south to Edward's treasury. To England, this is order. This is civilization, this is simply the natural state of things, the strong ruling the weak. But to many Scots, this is occupation, this is humiliation. And in the countryside, far from the castles where English officials sit comfortably, anger is building. That anger needs a spark. And in 1297, it finds one. William Wallace is not a king, he's not a great lord with armies and castles, he's a minor landowner, a younger son of a small noble family. In the grand scheme of Scottish society, he's nobody important. But Wallace has something more dangerous than noble birth. He has rage that won't die, and he has nothing left to lose. The exact details of what turns Wallace into a rebel are disputed. Some sources say English soldiers killed his wife, while others say he was personally wronged by an English official, but what matters is the result. Wallace stops trying to live peacefully under English rule and starts killing English soldiers. At first, it's small. An ambush here, a murdered tax collector there. The kind of local violence that English garrisons deal with regularly. But Wallace doesn't stop, and more importantly, he doesn't work alone. He begins gathering men. Not knights in armor, not wealthy nobles, but just ordinary Scots, farmers, laborious, small landowners, men who have watched their country swallowed piece by piece and finally decided they've had enough. In May 1297, Wallace leads an attack on the English garrison at Lanark. The English sheriff I was killed and the town was taken. Suddenly, this local troublemaker becomes something far more dangerous, a symbol. Word spreads across Scotland, there's a man who's actually fighting back, who's actually winning, and from every valley and hillside, more men come to join him. By summer, Wallace commands thousands. Not a professional army, not men trained in formations and tactics. Just Scots who are willing to fight back. But Wallace understands something crucial. He cannot meet England in open battle. His men have poor armor, basic weapons, minimal training. Against English heavy cavalry on flat ground, they would be slaughtered. So Wallace doesn't seek open battle. He strikes fast, disappears into forests and hills, avoids engagement on English terms. And this drives the English commanders absolutely insane.
This changes now.
By September, Edward I has had enough, and he orders his commanders in Scotland to crush this rebellion permanently. To bring Wallace to battle and end this embarrassment. The man chosen to do this is John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey. Experienced, well supplied, commanding the finest soldiers England can field. Surrey gathers his forces and marches north toward Stirling, where Wallace's army is reported to be gathering. Surrey is not worried. He has thousands of professional soldiers, while Wallace only has angry peasants. What Surrey doesn't know is that Wallace has chosen the ground. And on that ground, professional soldiers won't matter at all. Stirling is strategically vital. It sits at the lowest crossing point of the River Forth. Control Stirling, and you control movement between northern and southern Scotland. When Surrey's army arrives on the south bank of the river, they face a problem. The Forth is wide here, deep, and impossible to ford. There's only one way across, a narrow wooden bridge. And on the north side of that river, on the slopes of Abbey Craig Hill, Wallace's army is waiting. Surrey looks at the situation and sees what any commander would see, a tactical inconvenience. Yes, the bridge is narrow, crossing will take time, but once his army is across, the Scottish rabble will scatter. They always do. His officers are not so confident. Some suggest finding another crossing point, while others recommend waiting for reinforcements. A few even propose negotiating. Maybe Wallace will accept terms without a fight. Surrey dismisses all of this. The English army will cross the bridge, form up on the north bank, and sweep Wallace's peasants aside. Simple. What Surrey doesn't understand is that Wallace has studied this bridge. He has measured it, he has timed how long it will take for the men to cross, he calculated exactly how many English soldiers can fit on the north bank before the bridge becomes a bottleneck. The bridge at Stirling is barely wide enough for 2 horsemen to ride side by side. On the morning of September 11th, Wallace gives his commanders their orders. Let the English start crossing and don't attack yet. Wait until enough are across that they think they're safe, and then cut them off from the bridge and destroy them. The English begin crossing just after dawn. The first units across are cavalry, heavily armored knights on war horses. They cross carefully. The bridge is narrow and the footing is uncertain, but they cross. On the north bank, they form up in a meadow between the bridge and the slopes where the Scottish army waits. More cavalry follows, then infantry, crossbowmen. The numbers on the north bank grow steadily. Surrey watches from the south bank. Everything is proceeding normally. This is the moment Wallace has been waiting for. The Scottish army doesn't charge down the hill in a wild rush. They move in coordinated groups. The first group doesn't attack the English soldiers in the meadow. They attack the bridge itself. A formation of spearmen rushes forward and seizes the north end of the bridge. In seconds, the crossing is blocked. The English soldiers still on the south bank cannot advance, while the English soldiers on the north bank cannot retreat. Surrey, watching from across the river, realizes what's happening. His army has been cut in half. Thousands of Scottish infantry come down from the slopes, not in a disorganized mob, but in a tight formations with long spears. The meadow near the bridge is soft, recent rain has made it marshy. The heavy war horses, already burdened by armored riders, sink into the mud. A horse goes down, speared through the chest. Its rider, in full armor, crashes to the ground. Before he can rise, Scottish infantry are on him. They don't have the weapons to pierce plate armor easily, but they don't need to. They hook him with polearms, flip him over, and stab through the gaps, under the arms, through the visor, into the throat. The English cavalry, the pride of Edward's army, is being systematically destroyed. Surrey, on the south bank, can only watch in horror. His men are being butchered in front of him, and there's nothing he can do. The battle, if it can even be called that, lasts less than an hour. Small groups form back-to-back defensive circles. Individual knights perform incredible acts of bravery while some try to cut their way back to the bridge. Others attempt to swim the river in full armor. Almost all of them drown. One of the English commanders trapped on the north bank is Hugh de Cressingham, a man hated by the Scots for his brutal tax collection and his contempt for Scottish law. Cressingham fights on foot in the meadow, his heavy armour makes him slow, a group of Scottish spearmen surround him and a spear finds the gap under his arm, another strikes his leg, he falls to his knees and the Scots finish him quickly. By mid-morning, organised English resistance on the north bank has collapsed. Those who aren't dead are trying to surrender, but surrender is difficult when the enemy speaks a different language and has spent years watching their country brutalised. On the south bank, Surrey makes his decision. He's not waiting to see if the situation can be salvaged, he's not attempting a counterattack, he's running. By afternoon, the killing is done. The battlefield is silent except for the groans of the wounded and the cries of scavengers already arriving. The casualties are staggering, estimates suggest over 5,000 English soldiers died at Stirling Bridge. For context, that's more than fell at many famous medieval battles. The Scottish losses are minimal, a few hundred at most, maybe less. This disparity is almost unheard of in medieval warfare. Normally, even in decisive victories, both sides take heavy casualties. The news spreads across Scotland within days. Wallace's name becomes legendary overnight, the man who defeated England. The man who proved that occupation could be resisted. Castles held by English garrisons suddenly find themselves surrounded by Scottish forces and English officials flee south. Wallace is named Guardian of Scotland. A commoner, a minor landowner, now leads the entire resistance movement. For England, the defeat is humiliating. King Edward I is campaigning in France when he hears the news, he immediately begins planning his return. The myth of English invincibility is shattered, other occupied regions see what happened at Stirling and begin to think, if Scotland can resist, maybe we can too. Less than a year later, Edward returns to Scotland with a massive army and defeats Wallace at the Battle of Falkirk. At this time, on open ground where cavalry can maneuver, the result is reversed. Wallace goes into hiding, he fights a guerrilla war for years until he's finally betrayed, captured, and executed in London in 1305. His body is cut into pieces and displayed across Britain as a warning. But the warning doesn't work. Because what Wallace started at Stirling Bridge doesn't die with him. Another Scottish commander, Robert the Bruce, takes up the cause. In 1314, Bruce will defeat another English army at Bannockburn, and Scotland will secure its independence for centuries. And all of it traces back to that September morning in 1297. This battle is remembered in Scotland the way Agincourt is remembered in England or the Alamo in America. First, terrain is a weapon. Wallace didn't have better soldiers, he had better ground and the intelligence to use it. Second, patience defeats aggression. Wallace could have attacked as soon as the English started crossing, but he waited. He waited until exactly enough English soldiers were across to be vulnerable but not enough to be overwhelming. Third, leadership comes from results, not titles. Wallace was nobody by medieval standards. No royal blood, no inherited authority, but he understood warfare in a way the noble commanders didn't. Fourth, morale is a force multiplier. The English army at Stirling Bridge was professionally superior in every measurable way, but they were fighting for occupation, for conquest, for Edward's ambition, while the Scots were fighting for their homes, their families, their freedom. And when the trap closed, that difference in motivation became visible. The English broke and the Scots didn't. If you visit Stirling today, you can see the battlefield. The bridge that stood there in 1297 is long gone. It was replaced, rebuilt, moved slightly. But the river is still there, the meadow is still there. And on its summit stands the Wallace Monument, a tower built in the 1860s to commemorate the battle. From the top of that monument, you can look down and see exactly what Wallace saw. You can understand why he chose this ground, you can trace the English approach, see where the bridge was, imagine the meadow filling with soldiers who didn't realize they were already trapped. This wasn't just a battle, it was a teaching moment, a demonstration that power without wisdom is vulnerable and confidence without preparation is dangerous. The men who died in that meadow, English and Scottish both, are gone. Their names are mostly forgotten, the politics that brought them to that bridge are irrelevant now. But the lesson carved into that ground remains. Victory belongs to those who understand the terrain. Success belongs to those who wait for the right moment, and history belongs to those who refuse to accept that defeat is inevitable. The bridge is quiet now, the river flows gently and the meadow is peaceful. But the truth forged their echoes across the centuries, waiting for anyone willing to listen.